Welcome back to David's Math Hub. We will be reviewing about simplifying radicals. So, vocabulary that may be mentioned in this lesson is the following. Radical is the symbol, the square root, which is used to symbolize or denote roots, typically square roots. The radicand is the number or expression inside the radical sign. For this one, we're going to be just seeing numbers inside the square root, so that's called the radicand. The square root is the value when multiplying by itself gives the original number. So like if you think about like 2 times 2 is 4. If you take the square root of 4, you get 2. Kind of like that idea. And the perfect square is a number whose square root is an integer. Now, before we actually get into the square roots, simplifying them, we're going to review the perfect squares. So as you can see on my screen, here's a list of the square roots, the perfect numbers. So you can pause the video to check it out, and if you guys are using the questions that I'm going to be showing you, you guys can refer to this slide so that when you're doing the questions, it'll be easier. Let's start with question number 1. So it says simplify the following radical, square root of 8 or radical 8. Now the first step you would do is make sure to make a tree diagram. So I'll be showing you how this works. I know that some teachers like to put just the number itself, but the thing is, if you don't put the radical, a lot of students tend to forget, and that wouldn't be good. So I would always put the radical along the way, because students will forget like the radical is there in the first place. So that's why I would recommend putting the square root when making the tree diagram. And I'll show you guys why. So now the next step is to find numbers that multiply with 8. Like, what two numbers give you 8? So many of you may think 4 and 2. That is correct. So you could put square root of 4 on one side and 1 at the other side. The square root of 2 on the other side. See, it kind of looks like branches, so that's why it's called a tree diagram. Now you can see here, this radical 2 or square root of 2 can't be simplified because there isn't a perfect number except for 1. But for square root of 4, you can simplify it. And the square root of 4 is 2. You'll notice that I underlined those two numbers specifically. The reason why is because for step 2, we are going to multiply these numbers. We're going to multiply 2 and radical 2 or square root of 2. Now, a lot of people may think, okay, 2 times radical 2 is radical 4, but believe it or not, that is not correct because that number inside is called the radicand, and that whole number 2 is an integer, so you cannot really multiply the outside number with the inside number. That's what my professor calls it. So what I like to think of is there's a 1 in front of that radical 2. So really, you're just multiplying that imaginary 1 in front of the radical. It's like those things where you talk about multiplying variables, right? Like 5 times x is 5x, right? But for this one, we're talking about numbers, integers, and radicands. So the rule is you have to multiply the number in front of the radical. So you're technically doing 2 times 1. So when you do 2 times 1 radical 2 or 2 times radical 2, you get 2 radical 2. So that's going to be your answer. Hopefully that made sense. Now, I want to note a couple of things like I mentioned earlier. So that 2 is the outside, and that 2 in the inside, the radicand, is the inside number. So you could think of it that way. You can multiply the outside number with the inside number. So hopefully that gave you the idea. Now let's try another example similar to question 1. Let's try this question here. We have simplify the radical 27, or square root of 7. Now the first thing you would do is make a tree diagram. So square root of 27. So you could think of many ways to multiply 27. Many of you may think square root of 9 and square root of 3. That's fine. You can see right here the square root of 3 can't be broken down anymore, so we leave it as square root of 3. Now that square root of 9, we can simplify it. When you do that, you're going to get 3. Now, what you do is multiply these two numbers. So you just do 3 times radical 3. Like I mentioned in the first question, it's just going to be 3 radical 3. So your answer is going to be 3 square root of 3. Let's get into question number 3. Simplify the radical. So we have square root of 48. So once again, make the tree diagram, square root of 48. Now what you're going to do is find two numbers that multiply to 48. So you can go with bigger numbers or smaller numbers. So let's just say you're not sure what bigger numbers, are possible to get 48. So if you think something like 4 times 12, that's totally fine. So right here we have square root of 4 and square root of 12 on the right side. Now, what you can do is simplify the left side. Square root of 4 is going to give you 2. Now, you're going to notice on the right side that, believe it or not, the square root of 12 can be broken down a little bit more. So what you can do is you can do 6 times 2, or you can just do 3 times 4, because 4 is a perfect number. So we have square root of 3 and square root of 4. We could break down that square root of 4 even more. In this case, we get 2. Now we're going to multiply all 3 of these numbers. So we have 2 times radical 3. And you will get 4 radical 3, right? 2 times 2 is 4. And 4 times radical 3 is 4 radical 3, or 4 square root of 3. So that's going to be your answer. Try this question and see what you can come up with. It's a little bit bigger number, but give this a shot. If you're not sure, we'll do this together. So pause the video if you guys want to try this out. Okay, so first step, make your tree diagram. Square root of 72. What two numbers multiply to 72? So if you're not sure what multiplies to 72, what I like to say to a lot of people is, do you notice that there's a even number at the end, right? What is the smallest even number that you can divide? The answer would be 2. So if you're not sure what number to start with, every time you see an even number, you would divide it by 2, because that's the smallest possible even number you can divide it by. This is what we're going to do. So we have square root of 2 and square root of 36. And also, you will notice that the square root of 36, you can simplify that. And 36 is a perfect number. What is the square root of 36? The square root of 36 is 6. Now we just do 6 times radical 2, which gives you 6 radical 2. So if you're not sure of what two numbers multiply to 72, just look at the last number, see if it's even, and divide by 2. That works as well. So this trick works. It will take a while, but eventually you'll get your answer. But in this case, we were able to take the shortcut, so the answer is going to be 6 radical 2. Okay, question number 5. Try this, see what you can come up with, and we will do this together. Okay, so make your tree diagram, 92. What I did was, like I mentioned earlier, you can divide it by 2. So 92 divided by 2 is 46, so I have 46 on the left side and 40 and radical 2 on the right side. Now what we can do here is break up that 46. So we're going to divide this by 2 again because it's an even number. So when you do that, you get radical 2 and radical 23. Now to be fair, it's a little bit tricky because you can see here we have all radicals, right? So what we're going to do is simplify. We're going to multiply the radical 2's together, right? So when you multiply these two radical 2's together, you get radical 4. And what is the same thing as the square root of 4? It's going to be 2. So right here we get 2. And now the last part is to multiply 2 and radical 3. And you get 2 radical 3 as your final answer. So a little bit of a different approach. But if you guys follow this, then you should be fine. So if you see like two of the same numbers happening, you'll know right there that you're going to get out that number. Okay, so we're going to end it off with this last question right here. So try to come up with your answer. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, so you should have square root of 125. You can divide it by 5, so you'll get square root of 5 for one of them. And when you divide 125 with 5, you get 25. The good news is the square root of 25 can be simplified, and it is a perfect number. So on the right side, you'll have 5, and that radical 5 on the left side just stays as it is. Multiply these two numbers, and you will get 5 radical 5. So that's going to be your final answer. Okay, so we've reached the end of the video. So let's just sum up what we just did today. So we just learned how to break big numbers into smaller numbers using the tree diagram, finding the perfect numbers to get whole numbers, meaning like if you find those perfect numbers, you can make them into integers or those whole numbers instead of being radicals, and how to write each radical numbers in simplest form, meaning you would have the whole number in the front, and then you would have the radical with the radicand inside, or the number inside the radical. So if you have any other questions regarding how to simplify radicals, let me know in the comments. And thank you for joining the hub, and I'll see you in the next video. I'll see you then. Have a good day.